All right, welcome. For this demo, we are going to talk about how you take a rough sketch idea and throw a grid on top of it in order to create a cleaned up illustration. So I will use this rough sketch that I have right here. This is of a train station. I went through a series of thumbnail sketches. I have some good reference of the train station up at Silver Plume, and I kind of like the water tower that they have there, and they have this old-fashioned caboose, and so I kind of want to take a number of these elements, kind of throw them into this little illustration here. It's pretty quick. Try to balance the composition by throwing the conductor on the other side, but pretty much the focus is going to be on that water tower because it's pretty dang cool. So again, this rough sketch came from a series of smaller sketches, which came from also a series of photo reference that I had, which I do highly recommend that you guys familiarize yourself with whatever it is that you happen to be drawing. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this. Okay, so let's go through those steps one by one that you need to go through in order to construct your entire grid. And so you see I have a sheet of paper on top of my sketch. So what's the first thing we do? Number one, you establish the horizon line. So here's our horizon line. Number two, you set your vanishing point. Well, right here is my vanishing point. That's already preset. Once you know your vanishing point, that gives you center of vision. Number three, so draw in your center of vision, that line that goes straight down, perpendicular from your horizon line. You don't have to draw the full center of vision if it's not going to be a part of your grid, but you do need to draw it far enough off your sheet of paper or off of your plane of vision areas in order to establish a standing position, which brings us to number four. Number four, set your standing position. Again, underneath your plane of vision somewhere, put your standing position, make a point. Number five, 45 degrees out from a standing position until you intersect the horizon line. Number six, that gives you your diagonal measuring point. Once you know where your diagonal measuring point is, you can use that in order to then create the rows of your grid, or in order to create that perfect square. And as you'll see in my drawing, I'm going to need that perfect square quite a lot because I will have a lot of round, perfectly circular shapes that fit within a perfect square. And I need to know how those circular shapes look in perspective, and I will use that perfect square in order to figure that out. All right, so next step is I need to create a baseline. I can create a baseline anywhere I want in my perspective drawing. I already have things going on that I think I'm going to align my baseline with. So right now I see kind of this kind of little fence structure that surrounds the water tower. I'm going to start my baseline right there. I'm going to start my grid right there because it's aligned with it. Now, what measurements do I use along my baseline? Well, remember, what is the horizon line? Horizon line is height of viewer. So based upon where that horizon line is, I can then determine how I make measurements, and from there I can then determine how that translates to the baseline. So in my particular case, I'm assuming that from the ground to the horizon line is going to be about 5 feet. I'm looking at the height of my conductor right there, and he's kind of towering a little bit above that. The train is towering quite a bit above it. Also my buildings. I've kind of assumed that this would be about 5 feet, maybe slightly smaller. So then I take the start of my baseline and I go up and I divide that by 5 increments. I try to make it something that is easily measurable. So like inches or something like that. So I'll take those 5 increments and take them all the way down to my baseline. And then I'll draw a horizontal line, and then I'll draw 5 increments along the horizontal baseline. From here, I can then take those increments and then send them back to the vanishing point to start my gridding process. Now, you might want to do this in a separate color just because you want your grid to be kind of different than the rest of your drawing so you don't get confused as to what is what. So once I know what those lines are going back, I draw a diagonal from the diagonal measuring point all the way across my grid until I get to that very corner right there. And once I've done that, then I can just find those intersection points one by one, boop, 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 all the way up. And where you have an intersection, boop, right there, that's where you draw the horizontal line. The diagonal is not part of the grid, but the diagonal is important in order for you to find the horizontal corresponding lines that are a part of your grid. So you can draw your diagonal very lightly, but what you need are those points. And I really encourage you to actually make a mark on those points. Where you find those intersections between the diagonal line and the lines going back, actually make a mark. Make a good, nice mark that you can see. And that will help reinforce in your mind what that is there for. Once you've made that mark, you draw the horizontal corresponding lines and go all the way back. Now, in my particular case, these lines represent 1 unit equals 1 foot. So now I can take these measurements and I can start applying them to my water tower right here and to these buildings back here, and I can start to make appropriate corrections as I start to draw them into place.